You create that future structure, almost that organizational chart. But and many times your head's in a lot of those seats.
Today we have Joe McClung with us. Joe is a leader who has spent his career building, scaling, and developing high-performing teams. And Joe brings a grounded perspective on what it actually takes to grow an organization. What's the biggest misconception that leaders and hiring managers have about what actually is required of them?
I think it starts before you start the scaling. It starts with that foundational structure. And one of the best things I've ever thought of, and it's something we utilize, I've learned from EOS and different models, is even when you're starting the business before you get into scale, is you create that future structure, almost that organizational chart. But as in, and many times your head's in a lot of those seats and you have that accountability, what's expected of that role, when you go to scale and now you're starting to hire and expand and you need to be able, it's really easy to look at that organizational chart and say, okay, which of these jobs, these accountabilities, things that need to get done, am I not doing a good job of, right? And then it's easy, great, I got to fill that hole. I got to fill this. And you already have that accountability already set. You already have the job description basically set because you know it's expected in that role. You're not making it up or falling into that trap of, hey, I've got Jim, he's good at that. Let's just have him do that role, and letting the individual drive the role versus the role go to select the individual. And then the second thing I think ahead of time is planning culture, right? And people say, what's culture? I think a lot of time it starts really with those core values, right? Setting what's that core value and what's that why. People will say mission statement, but that's really, your why statement. And you have both of those and you build from a foundation of, you have the architecture, you know what your core values are, you know why you exist. Now it's easier to go out and not identify the right people because you have the description, but also attract them that are going to fit in your organization because they're going to feel the resonance of your why. They're going to feel motivated by the core values that you're living out. Right. You do those two things, then it builds.
Yep. Okay. That's awesome advice. And what happens if somebody is already like, they got caught up and all of a sudden they've realized they're scaling.
Right. Yeah.
They're in the thick of it and they didn't get to do this beforehand, but they're so busy. But I'm guessing it would be probably a good thing to just take a pause for a moment, even for a day.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens. That's a good problem. You find yourself with a tiger by the tail, right? Yeah. The market's coming after you. You figured out that market product fit and things are scaling. I've been there, but you're exactly right. Go slow to go fast, right? Yeah. And because it's just a little bit of a defining, what do we really need, right? What's that right person in an organization? How are we going to execute? What partners can we find to help us? I'm busy, don't think, I love, a little bit of Dan Sullivan, that 10X is greater than 2X. And one of the key philosophies there is the who, not the how, right? So some of that is, okay, what's my partner that's going to go help me identify and come alongside to make sure we're doing this process right?
Absolutely. So as these teams start to grow, where do you see hiring managers struggling the most? And what do you wish more of them would understand earlier on going through this process of scaling and growing?
I think it's kind of one and the same. I think people will over-index on experience and downplay attitude and motivation. And why I say that is, your natural tendency when people starting to search is they start thinking of those hard skills, the location, the education, and they create these, I'm doing these circles because they overlap. And many times by the time you create that concentric circles, the overlap, that target is so small that the group of people you're dealing with, the odds of you finding the right experience and that right attitude is tough. And so they end up hiring people with experience but don't fit the attitude. In reality, 73% of people that don't stay in the organization for a year, 73% of it is because it has nothing to do with experience. It's all attitude.
Okay. Wow.
So really think hard. Do I need that experience or can we teach that? Do they really need to live, and be in every week, or can this really be remote? Can I open the comp? How do you open that aperture and then over index on that attitude and that motivation? If you're going to have a solid team longer with that aspect.
And how do they transition from that education and that paperwork to going more into the conversation and the feelings and getting, that true connection into that true corporate culture that they're looking for?
I think it's a couple things. One, authentic. A lot of people love to think they need to play games. This is not games. You're going to be working with these people for years. So it needs to be authentic. It needs to be transparent and real. But, the past is the future with the lights on. And so the best way is true understanding someone is diving into their past experiences, those behavioral questions. And it's not rocket science methodology, but having some really defined behavioral questions, such as, can you tell me a time you failed to achieve a goal? And here's the key: shut up. Don't lead the witness, that you overcame and solved the problem. Just be quiet. Don't give them clues, because they're going to tell you a lot about themselves, how they approach adversity, right? Are they taking ownership when they're saying I words in there? Or are they, or are they blaming others? Or are they just part of it? Or they did this to me. And when things go wrong, which they do, they will, how do they react, right? And have a few of those identified and really be able to listen for those behavioral questions. Those usually get you to right more often than not.
Who's the blaming versus the problem solving? Big. Oh, wow. I think we all know that, but sometimes we just need a refresher. We're caught up in such this busyness of the growing, where things can be like hitting us in so many different directions, that we just have to take some steps back and just go back to some of the fundamentals.
And your point on a busy manager is prioritization. If they're commercial facing, you got customers yelling at them. They have board meetings or managers to talk to. They have their own team that's having problems. And so they've got a lot of different immediate pressures. But it's just that realization, the impact of that next hire, what it can have on the organization and on your team, needs to be front of mind, because it's never about you don't have the time. It's just what's a priority. And once you realize that impact, you're going to find the time. You're going to be present when it matters. You're going to do that little bit of prep and that little bit of follow-up so you can retain it and make the best selection, because there's nothing more important really for the success of an organization than the people they have on the team. I mean, I'm sure you've seen how many great products, great companies have failed because they've had the wrong leadership and they brought the wrong team in. I led a team of leaders for many years before I am now in talent, and I never trained my team. I never gave them tools and tips on how to actually hire, why to prioritize hiring, what that impact is. I said, hey, you have an opening in Albuquerque, good luck, right? I didn't give them the tools. And many of the tools, as you identified before, are not really that complicated. Usually when you hear them, you get that VA moment, like, duh.
Yeah.
But you need to have them fresh in your mind. And, so that mix of having some simple tools and really understanding the priority is crucial.
And
I think that has to be from the top down.
Yeah. And you have to know how to do it and to be able to train. Yeah. And so that it can repeat over and over again. So almost having video training, SOPs, all those wonderful things that seem, those are kind of boring, but boy, they have so much value inside of them to keep things on the right track.
Well, and if you talk about SOPs and process, right? It seems like, do we need it? I like to do it my way, but I do it different ways each candidate. Here's the problem. If you think about decisions, right? There's lots of variables within decisions, kind of like a scientific experiment. You have multiple variables in an experiment, it's not going to be valid. So this is the same thing. If you change the variables every time, all the variables, it's going to be really hard to determine, is it the candidate or the situation? But if the situation and the process is very similar every time, it's going to be easy to isolate that singular variable, which is the candidate, and make a more succinct, consistent decision.
So are you seeing that there's some different dynamics happening, especially, after we've gone through COVID, we've gone remote. Now people are kind of pulling back into the office. Some are doing hybrid. A new generation is coming in too. Do you see some dynamics in how leaders are being able to handle that or struggling with that?
I think leadership foundation hasn't changed in thousands of years. It really hasn't, if done well,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
It's how it's how it's delivered is going to be different, but finding that clarity of direction, empowerment, support, meeting people, adjusting your leadership style, having a platinum rule, not just a golden rule,
Mm,
to be able to get the people, in those elements, all of those still matter. Whether that's done like this on a video, whether it's, they're always in the office, but I don't think that's really changed. I think you got to adapt it to where it is and the people you have, right? So, and with the roles they have. So I think I'm older school generation, and sometimes I get in the office, I'm the first one here. Where's everybody? But I look at the output, they're great. Clients are happy. The candidates are coming, like all of our KPIs, if they're great, why should that matter to me? So some of it's in, so that's kind of one of my aspects. Now, I will say, getting to the remote versus the hybrid, is there is a requirement for managers and leadership and companies to create trust within the organization. And many times, an element of the trust equation is intimacy. And it is hard to create good intimacy and connection over video, right? Getting real. So you have to be intentional, have those events, have those mandatory fun things, I like to call it. It brings people together, that makes them real, that makes them trust each other. So that way they have a stronger working and better bond. So I would say that was the only attitude. If you don't have a full remote force, you have a different generational, you have to be intentional about bringing them together, because the water cooler isn't going to happen.
And that's a big key component too. And when you do have that ability to be face to face and to do activities together versus whether they're work functions or just fun functions, that's really where that intimacy starts to happen. And that's communication opens up and it becomes more of that family. And trust building and integrity can really step into place on who you are and what your foundation is and what your core values are.
Yeah. I mean, yesterday, my team, we volunteer once a month, but we were building bikes for kids, for Christmas, this program called On Bikes. And so we had this assembly line going, turning screws, putting on tires. And, some people are terrible at it. Some are somewhat competent, but we had a great time. And we built, 30 bikes together as a team, and then went and had a beer afterwards. I mean, that brings groups together. It brings teams together, and you're able to do it and make an impact greater than yourself. What can be better?
Yep, absolutely. So if you had to share something that you know now to yourself that was 10 years ago, or to somebody that's just starting the scaling process with these managers, is there some words of wisdom or something that you could share to just be a refresher, a reminder, or an aha moment like, oh, yes,
Mm-hmm.
didn't think about
Yeah, I
that.
know. I guess when you say it, you brought me back, years ago when you first asked it. And the first thing comes to mind is that new leader, that new manager, right? Usually you're promoted into that role. And in a scaling organization, that happens quickly. And they're promoted into those roles because they were the best at what they did. So they fall to the default of saying, do it my way. Here's how to do it. The biggest thing you can do, the most powerful thing you can do ever, a leader, is step back and provide the agency and oxygen for people to step up and fail, possibly, or show you there's a different way. I think that is the biggest failure. Like, if you allow people that reins to go before you believe they're ready, you're going to build really resilient organizations.
And as you step up, there's new responsibilities. There's different ways of managing people. There's different levels. And so you have to help equip them so that they can be confident
Yeah,
in that role and keep that why focus there, that
yeah,
foundation focus there. Because if you do lose that, everything starts to crumble and it'll crumble faster as you've been building it slowly.
correct. Yeah.
So Well, this has been amazing. And I know that there are definitely, owners out there and managers out there that are going to see this, that are in the process of scaling or getting ready for that big boom. And just being able to have that reset and say, let's do some prioritizing. Let's make sure our foundation is strong. Let's make sure we have everything in order of what we want to do, how we envision it and seeing it, prioritizing it in the right place. What do you say to them when it's not working on pivoting?
What specifically? Give me a little more.
They're growing, the managers, maybe I think sometimes people resist changing, pivoting. Like you said, I'm going to do it my way because that's how I've always done it. What way of giving them to say, like, hey, listen, pivoting is good, change is good. If things
Yeah.
aren't working, stop
Yeah.
and take a moment.
Yeah. You have to really appreciate change and comfort, where people are, right?
Mhm.
You got to have them a reason what's going to be in the future. But then also, recognize they're giving up something that was comfortable, something they liked, right? Even if it's a good change, there's always that element of loss. Recognize it, right? But focus on what that change is going to mean to them. What's that change going to be? Because it's classic change management. What's an impact going to be to you? Because until you can put it into that language of what's in it for them, right? Because that's always a question. You might get change right in front of you, but as soon as you turn your back, it's going to go back to where it was. They have to see value long term, and with the recognition that we get it. In the short term, you're losing something. We
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
that, right? And that recognition of that goes a long way, as well as that visioning of what it's going to be in the future and why it matters.
Absolutely.
Articulate that well. You bring people along with you, and recognize it's going to be a continuum, right? There's that Pareto principle. I mean, that 20% is going to be 80% of the production. That 20% is also the ones that move and adopt first, right? If you look at adoption curves through any scenario, you always have that early adopter. Then you have that chasm that seems annoying, right? For whether you're launching products or creating change that's never going to happen. But then slowly across that chasm, get to that medium majority, and then it becomes a standard, right? As a leader, expect that. You're not going to change. Those are almost fundamental human nature and group dynamics. Be prepared for it and manage through it, and you'll get the change you need.
I think I know you're going to impact so many people that get to see this and help businesses just do this so much better. It doesn't feel comfortable, but this is the right thing because on the other side of that uncomfortable is some great stuff.
Yeah, well, part of the uncomfortable is the fun. You
Yeah,
know,
embrace it, enjoy it.
exactly,
All right, Joe.
exactly.
Well, it was such a pleasure having you. We thank you so much for being here. You have so
Sure.
much more wisdom to share, but we appreciate you taking the time out. And it was an honor to have you here as one of our spotlight guests. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And if there's anybody that has questions, needs, our specialty happens to be in med tech talent, right? That's our world. But so please reach out to us. That if there's, questions, SOP templates, different things, expansion guides. We've created a lot of this. So, like I said earlier, have a trusted partner that, as Dan Sullivan said, don't find the who, not the how. Thanks so much.
All right.
Have a great
Thanks.
day.